talk about that election with Sir John Curtice, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. I mean, he was the favourite candidate throughout the election. He was also the continuity candidate, very much Nicola Sturgeon's favourite candidate, we understand. What does his election tell us about what's going to happen to, well, the Union, to Scotland's independence chances, and, of course, let's come on later to what's going to happen in terms of the next Westminster election as well in 2024. First of all, Scotland, what does this tell us?
Well, the honest truth is it doesn't tell us anything very directly what's going to happen to those things. What we do know is that Mr. Yousaf was the less popular of the two principal candidates amongst the wider public, particularly amongst those who are currently opposed to independence. And to that extent, at least, Mr. Yousaf starts at something of a relative disadvantage in the crucial quest that the SNP have, if they're ever going to achieve independence, of trying to get support for the idea well above the 50% mark, which both he and Ms. Forbes during the leadership campaign acknowledged was really a prerequisite for them ever being able to win any ballot should it eventually arise. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's going to be impossible for him to do that, but I think certainly he's going to have to perhaps pivot away from a lot of arguments about progressive values in a well-being economy, which, you know, in themselves will be attractive to many an existing Yes supporter, to perhaps developing much more what he would regard as the economic case for independence that would appeal beyond existing Yes supporters. And that gets us into the whole argument about whether or not Scotland is going to be better off inside the UK but outside the EU versus being inside the EU and outside the UK. That's the choice that now faces Scotland. It's a very different choice than the one in 2014. So far, the attempts of the Scottish government under Nicola Sturgeon to develop and then promote that economic case hasn't got very far. We've had some lengthy papers, but they haven't really...
No, indeed. I mean, the economic case has got weaker since 2014, the first independence referendum, after various different economic difficulties. And, of course, there's the question of, like, will an independent Scotland be able to join the EU? That's still a very big question mark as well. And, what currency they would have. And, of course, the trade barriers we've seen erected over the issue of Northern Ireland. What issues come up with Scotland and England? England, of course, being the biggest trading partner of Scottish businesses. But it is interesting, Nicola Sturgeon was an extraordinarily popular, powerful, dominant figure in Scottish politics, as had Alex Salmond been before her. She wasn't able to deliver above 50% support for independence. It's now below 40% on some of the more recent polls. So to say
it's not that low, Julie.
Oh, has it gone back up again?
Well, once you take out the don't knows, you take all of the opinion polls that have been conducted during the leadership election, on average, the figure is 47%. It's slipped a bit. But, do not underestimate the fact we are still talking about a country in which nearly half of the public wish to leave the United Kingdom.
Right, indeed. But the crucial thing is actually a lot of the people who would like the UK, Scotland to leave the UK, don't actually want a referendum in the next few years. They're more concerned about issues like the health service, like schools. And on that record, the SNP don't do too well, do they? When it comes to the next general election, we've got local elections coming up very soon as well, but we've also got general election coming up likely next May or June 2024. Labour apparently are delighted. They're crowing. They've only got one seat in Scotland right now. They think they could win between 14 and 20. Of course, then you're looking at Labour being, on the polls currently, being able to get elected without needing a coalition or deal with Scotland, getting a majority. Are they right to be happy this morning in Labour?
Well, I think the Labour Party will certainly feel that they have an opportunity, and they're quite right to feel that way. They are now running at around 30% in Scotland. That leaves them only 10 points behind the SNP. The reason why that matters is that kind of level of lead, the Labour Party begins to start to pick up seats from the SNP. I mean, there are around 10 seats at the moment in Scotland, which might fall to Labour if the SNP lead across Scotland as a whole is down to 10 points. Now, one has to say that rise in Labour support up to the 30% mark has relatively little to do with developments in Scotland and an awful lot to do with one, Partygate, and two, the Liz Truss administration, which has boosted the party across the UK as a whole. But, even so, the SNP simply stood still. If Labour goes up, they're going to start picking up some seats in Scotland. You are right that the Scottish Government has been widely criticised for its performance on the delivery of public services. including Mr. Yousaf personally as a Scottish Health Secretary. Only about 20% of people in Scotland think he's been doing that job well. Yeah. However, so far at least, voters in Scotland have been inclined in recent elections to vote on the constitutional question rather than on issues of how the government's being run. To that extent, at least, politics in Scotland is now rather more like that in Northern Ireland. And the vast majority of people who are in favour of independence are voting for the SNP, and the vast majority of people who are opposed to independence are not voting for the SNP. Yeah. Now, that said, the Labour Party is the one unionist party that has some ability to appeal to some people who are in favour of independence but are not necessarily going to vote for the SNP. Yeah. The crucial question is whether or not the Labour Party can increase that constituency. I certainly think if Labour's vote is going to go up above the 30% mark, assuming there isn't some dramatic collapse in support for independence, they're going to have to try to win over more yes supporters. And that, yes, may be partly done by attacking the SNP's record in government.
You're going on domestic issues. Just finally, and one sentence if you would, run right over time, but I want to ask your thoughts. He wants to go ahead, Humza Yousaf, with these trans self-ID reforms, widely regarded as being, what brought Nicola Sturgeon down. There is no real support in the general public for these reforms, is there?
You're right. It's deeply unpopular in terms of the general public, but this is now a legal issue as well as a political issue. When Mr. Yousaf becomes First Minister, he will get the legal advice of Scotland's law officers as to whether or not they think there is a legal case, and it's a legal case, to pursue. I would have thought that if his best advice is to follow the legal advice. If they say there isn't a case, he shouldn't pursue it. But if they say there is, then the truth is, as the head of Scotland's devolved institutions, I think most people would say probably he's duty-bound to follow that advice and to challenge the UK government.
So John Curtice, really appreciate you joining us. Great to get your analysis, as always, Press for Politics.